All right. Good afternoon on this wintry Thursday in Minnesota. Thank you all for joining us for our first of three-part cybersecurity webinar series. We'll do more webinar series, but this one, these three are all kind of focused on similar things. Today is episode 1, and our topic is ransomware. And we're going to get started right away here, but first I want to go over a couple things. Number 1, you are all muted. So if you are enjoying this webinar while you're eating your lunch, feel free to chomp away. We will not hear you. I know at least one of our attendees has a proclivity for snacking on almonds, so go for it. Don't be shy. Number 2, we will also be recording this webinar and we'll be making it available to those that are registered once that is available. So look out for that. Feel free to step away. You'll be able to watch the recording later. And number 3, if you have questions, we would love to address them. So just go ahead and type them into the chat, and if it makes sense to bring them up during a particular slide, I'll do so. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and answer them at the end. This webinar is scheduled for an hour, but I believe the presentation will take between 30 and 45 minutes, which will leave us plenty of time to cover your questions at the end. All right, let's get started. For those of you who have never met us before, my name is Jordan Darling, and I'll be your color commentator and facilitator this afternoon. I'm a certified information system security professional, Vice President of Top Dog PC, and CEO of HighTech Secured, and I'm happy to be here. Your main presenter today is Joe Malmberg. Joe is the owner and president of Top Dog PC, the CTO of HighTech Secured, and the holder of SANS GIAC Security Essentials certification, and many other security certifications as well that I won't list off here, but just know that he's the real deal. Joe and I started our businesses the same year in 2004. So between the two of us, we have a wealth of knowledge and experience, not just in technology and security, but as small business owners, which is really where our passion is. So Joe, please take it away.
Thanks, Jordan. So yeah, welcome again. I just want to welcome everyone today. This is our first webinar in our cybersecurity webinar series. Reason we decided to put these together is just that security has become a really big source of questions from our partner base. So I hope you find this educational. Again, thanks for taking the time to join us. And I want to start this whole thing off with the way I've done a lot of these presentations before, with some statistics. Some of these might look a little bit familiar to you who've attended our events or gone through previous training with us, but I've actually updated some of them for 2019, 2020. So first of all, some of these are new numbers. 25% of small businesses are well prepared for a cyber attack. In my experience, that's probably about right. 80% of these are hacking-related breaches are accomplished with a stolen password or an easily guessable password, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail in a minute. This statistic, 85% of businesses with under 1,000 employees have been hacked, and most don't even know. I think hack is a pretty broad definition in this case. That can mean, it could mean an actual thing that you noticed. It could also just mean like something as simple as receiving a phishing email or clicking on a phishing email because this is a successful one. 62% of businesses experience phishing and social engineering attacks in 2018. If in our partner base, I would say that that's probably over 90%. We've seen phishing attacks pretty much everybody. Social engineering with a good number of them. 52% of those featured hacking, 28% malware, and 32 to 33% phishing, social engineering. Moving along, these are some statistics you've seen me show before. Just the fact that cybercrime has taken over all other crime, which is it's astounding to me. And when you look at the the total cost of this, 1.5 trillion yearly, and the fact that they're expecting it to grow to 6 trillion by 2021. It's just a staggering number, 7% of the world economy. Another number here that I updated is the cost of an average cybersecurity incident for small businesses, since this is where we all fall, 10 to 49 employees and 50 to 249 employees. That cost is up a little over $10,000 from last year. It's going to continue to go up, and we'll get into that a little bit. This is kind of a sad statistic, but 60% of small businesses go out of business within 6 months of being victimized, and I think that that's specifically with some of these bigger things, especially with what we're talking about today with ransomware. That it's a huge financial hit from the ransom perspective, but also from the downtime and image perspective. And just some examples. We don't often see these companies like this in the headlines because they're small companies. But this was back in 2018, a supplier based out of Denver that had to shut down due to a ransomware attack. Got a clinic here. This was just April of last year, a medical practice. They also had fell victim to a ransomware attack and had to shut down. Here's another one just in October of last year, same thing. And this month, this is a really crummy thing. It happened in December. They got hit, this call center, and they said, we're going to suspend operations temporarily, and then they ended up just shutting down. So 300 people lost their jobs as a result of that. So this is real stuff. It's scary stuff. And so, you wouldn't be listening to this if you didn't understand that. Just a couple more pieces of information. This is some information I've brought up before, but when I talked about passwords that people might have already for maybe your password or people that work in your organization, there's so many available on the internet. 4.2 billion email account credentials and 85 million stolen personally identifiable information records for sale on the dark web. Most of the U.S. population has at least one compromised credential on the dark web. I know I do. I've got a bunch of them on there. I get a list of them every single time the new one pops up. 18.6% of the U.S. population has a compromised social security number within the dark web, and these are statistics from last year. So this is going to just continue to grow. So jumping into ransomware. What is ransomware? This is a definition that I kind of called together with a few different sources on the internet. But ransomware is a type of malware that is going to do two things. One of two things or both things. It's going to threaten to publish, or this is what it usually does, is perpetually block access to the victim's data, to your data, unless a ransom is paid. So I'm going to go through a couple ways that this happens. This is a little bit of a higher level method, and typically this is a couple that we've seen happen. Occurred mostly, we suspect they occurred mostly this way. So first thing that is going to happen is that the attacker is going to try to identify a vulnerable network, and they do that using just like network scans. The scans are automated. They're looking for unpatched software, and when they find something that might be listening, then they do a little bit more investigating. If they can determine who it is, let's just say, for example, that they're scanning TopDog PC's network. They see that we've got a VPN open on the internet, and they say, hey, you know what? I think that I know that this VPN is TopDog PC's. Let's see if we can find any email addresses and passwords for sale on the internet for topdogpc.com, or maybe there are some that just have been dumped already in a public database. Then what they're going to do is check those usernames and passwords. If they're smart, they'll test them out on another site first, like Facebook or LinkedIn or Netflix. That actually happened to me. I had a Netflix password that I had created a long time ago and had forgotten that I'd shared it with more than one site, which you are not supposed to do, but I did it, and somebody logged into my Netflix account, and they started streaming, and I didn't notice it until all of my Netflix videos started streaming in Spanish one day, and I logged into the Netflix site and noticed that people were streaming it from Chile and Mexico. So I changed that password and logged everybody out. But yeah, so they'll verify your username and password at a site like that, and then after that, they want to cover their tracks. So they're gonna connect to that network. So they're connecting to the Top Dog network, but they're not going to connect right from their computer. That would be a bad move because we'd see where they're coming from. So they're going to use a proxy, and they might use more than one proxy. A proxy is just another computer that they can tunnel into, and then from there attempt to infiltrate our network. Then what they're going to do is, if they have a password that works, they're just going to log in. And from our perspective, if in a normal network setup, we're probably not going to notice anything because we're not seeing anybody trying to get in and trying to get in and trying to get in. We're seeing somebody who just logged in once and they're in. So then once they're in, what are they going to do? Well, once they're in, they're going to look around. They want to find out a bunch of different things. They want to find out what you have that's of value. If you have information on your network that looks like it's a gold mine for them, they're going to collect it, and they're going to maybe say, hey, we can, if we threaten to release this information, then we can maybe get a little bit of extra money from them. So the next piece is with sorry, I've got something making noise in the background on my computer. The next piece that they're going to do after they've looked and determined what information of value you have on your machine is they're going to go around, they're going to try to locate the backups that you have of everything, and they're going to delete them. They're going to delete any maybe cached copies you have anywhere. They basically want to make it impossible for you to recover your data from what they're about to do. And what they're about to do then is run their application on your machine that's going to start encrypting all of the data on it. So you might log in to your computers the next day and see something like this. So we actually had a partner that we were working with that we were doing backup only for that this happened to. They called us on a Saturday and said, hey, listen, Joe, we were on our computers today and we've got this message saying all of our files have been encrypted. And there's these little text files on all the computers just describing, saying that our stuff's encrypted and I can't seem to run anything. Is this for real? And we went on, we logged in remotely, and sure enough, that was exactly what had happened. But they're in good shape because they had good backups. So we said, listen, it's Saturday. Let's initiate the restore. We kicked off the restore. We should be good to go by Monday. Monday morning, we had the restore done of their server. But unfortunately, we walked into the business owner's office, and he had, some of you have heard this story before, he had 2 hard drives hooked up to his personal computer, and he said, hey, are these encrypted? Because it kind of looks like they're encrypted. And the 2 drives that he had plugged in were, one of them was every single picture he'd taken since 1993, and the other one was a backup of all those pictures, and it was the only copies he had of them. So in that case, we ended up having to, he needed those pictures back. There are a few things that you can try in a situation like that. There are some of these applications that encrypt your files that are just really poorly written, and in those cases, they're so poorly written that people have been able to extract the keys. In some cases, the people who wrote them made enough money and they released the keys. But in this case, that wasn't the case with this one. So we ended up having to reach out to the person that had done this to them and negotiate a fee. I think ultimately it was around $8,000 or $9,000 to get his files back. We made them prove that they could decrypt them by getting us 3 files back. They did, so we felt pretty confident that paying that ransom would result in us getting the files back. We did pay it. FBI says you're not supposed to pay it. I think a lot of people do pay it. That's why it's becoming such an issue. We got the files back. And then we had to do all of the cleanup and everything else on top of that. So, he paid $8,000 for that, but he also had to pay to have basically everything in his entire office wiped and reloaded.
Hey,
But
Joe, a couple questions here.
yeah,
Number one, how do you find, you mentioned like a site that you go to see if there's some of these encryption keys published to the public. How do you go about finding those sites? What are some sites that, are there a couple sites that are more reputable to go to? Or
yeah, in one of our more recent ones where we had to help a customer out, or we helped somebody out who wasn't a customer. They called us on a Friday night and they had a bunch of they had been hit with ransomware. In that case, that was about a month ago. I went to a site that I usually go to that has a lot of technical conversation. It's bleepingcomputer.com, and what you can do there is there are links on there to help you identify what type of ransomware you have. Typically, the way that you're able to determine what you're hit with is the format of the ransom letter. So, what we're looking at here on this screen, or on this one, based on what either that file is named or the contents of that, they can sometimes determine what kind of encryption was performed, or which tool was used. And I'll tell you, to be honest, I went to, in that case, I visited about 3 different sites that I was referred to from Bleeping Computer, and I got 2 of the same answers on one site and a different answer on another one. So it's not perfect. But when you're hit with something like that, I would say you can certainly try to do some investigating on your own, but I would probably reach out to an IT professional once you're hit.
cool. And one more real quick one.
Yeah.
There's do they have to be actually remote controlling the systems to initiate an attack?
That's a good question. The answer is no, and I'll actually give you the next here in the next slide. We're gonna address the situation where maybe that isn't the case. So we can do all those things that we just talked about, where you have somebody who's actually like doing some drive-by scans and trying to see if you're vulnerable, or you can send somebody an email with an infected attachment and let them do it for you. So let's take a look at one of these. This is actually an example that popped up just a couple days ago. It didn't happen to me, but another IT service provider that I know. So they had this happen. So they got an email. Somebody got an email. Anyone who's on this may have seen something like this before. You get an email. It's got a Word doc attached to it. The Word doc is password protected. It's password protected because a lot of email scanners won't be able to scan it for content when it's password protected, because the document is encrypted. And you open up the file and you get something that looks like this. It says, "Hey, this is my resume." The email says, "Hey, this is my resume," but when you open it up, it says you can't open this, you can't view this because it was created in a newer version of Word. And if you want to view this, click Enable Editing. So first thing, they entered in that password. Second thing they did was they clicked on or they opened up that document, and then so password, document, and then they're going to go up there, they're going to click Enable Content, and what happens is this Word document has a macro in it, and macros can do a ton of different things. Basically, you can have an executable on there. And usually what's happening here, when you hit that Enable Content, it's going to run a command on your computer using PowerShell, using tools that exist on your computer that come from the factory. And what it's going to do is maybe make a request to pull a file down from the internet. And then based on the commands from that file that they're pulling down from the internet, they're going to execute something on your machine, something nefarious. And it can be any number of things. It could be ransomware. That's a really popular way for the popular thing to do. It could be a keylogger. It could be a lot of different things, but it's challenging for antivirus to catch those things because it's not a virus that's running initially. It's built-in tools that are running. So do that, and then you get a nice little message like this. One other one worth pointing out, and again, some of you may have seen this before I kind of trimmed it down. This is an example of a message, something that you might see. This is a message that's purporting to come from Microsoft saying, hey, this is an anti-spam product we're enabling on all of our accounts. We need you to okay it in order for it to work on your account. So he goes in, he's like, yep, this looks good. It says it's from Microsoft. It's a little interesting because the way Microsoft is spelled is weird. Most of the time I don't see it this poorly done. The publisher's website is not Microsoft.com, which should raise some red flags. And he's giving him access to every single thing on here. But he okays that, says accept. And then a little while later, every single message in his mailbox is encrypted. So this is an example of an attack that actually isn't affecting the files on your local computer, but instead affecting these things up in the cloud. You can see what his message looks like. It's just pure garbage. So what do we do? What do we do if we get hit with ransomware? This is some of the questions already. We're heading down this path. The first thing you should do is consult your disaster recovery plan. I'm sure everybody here has one of those, right? You update it every single year and you run through it and do dry runs. It's a really important document to have. Everything on this list here should be documented prior to an attack. We should operate under the assumption that we're going to be victims of an attack like this. So first thing I recommend is contact your IT support partner and then start documenting the attack. Photograph any messages that you have. Screenshots are okay, but your machine might be infected and you'll lose the screenshot. So, take a photograph of the message that you have on your screen so that you have that. You grab your cell phone. Assess what's been infected. So, which machines have been infected, what data on what machines have been infected. Document the time and date that the attack happened, what you did, you or somebody else did before the attack and after the attack. Make an assessment of which equipment has been infected, data that's at risk, what sensitive or critical information has been lost or compromised. Another thing, if you're a covered entity, if you're subject to something like HIPAA or your financial organization, or even in Minnesota, there's certain types of data where if you have personally identifiable information that includes like Social Security numbers, you're required to report it to the person who owns that information that belongs to. In our case, one of the first things we'll often do is we'll hop on their firewall. And assuming that they have a firewall, like a real enterprise class firewall, and we'll make sure that anything that is open from the outside gets turned off, and we'll also look for any connections to the outside world that are currently occurring, because you don't necessarily have to have things open to the outside world for people to get in. If you have an employee click on something like that, those things can happen without having outbound ports open, inbound ports open. Depending on the level, depending on like the message that you're getting, this in that most recent example that I mentioned a month ago, I said that the very first one that we dealt in, that first story I brought up, they had about an $8,000 ransom. And this one that happened a month ago, it was like a $50,000 ransom. They said, we don't care about this data, and they said we're not going to pay it. If you have a big demand like that, though, it might be worth consulting your legal team and contact your cyber insurance policy holder or your insurance company. The reason you want to do that is sometimes they'll want you to work with, depending on what the policy is, they may have somebody specific they want you to work with during the cleanup of this. Cyber insurance is probably another topic for another video, but another webinar. But it's a really important thing. I think every small business should have it. It's not a super expensive policy to have. But one thing I would point out is it's probably not a good idea to announce that you have it. Hey, we'll get into that in a minute. So here are some things that you can do. Let's just those are the steps that you take after it happens, and it really can go any way after that, right? The cleanup, really depending on the level of the infection, the cleanup could take days, it could take weeks, it could take months. So mitigating this ahead of time. As I said, I think that we should all just assume that we're going to get infected one day. And there are a lot of different things you can do to decrease your attack surface. I think one of the best things that you can do is putting together a good ongoing end user training program. Your end users are potential nodes of attack. Converting them into security sensors with good training is going to really go a long way to shutting down that source of an attack. And when I talk about end user information security training, I'm talking about something that is going to teach them about current, existing, new, and emerging threats on an ongoing basis, something that's trackable, and something that's going to continue to test them. And we actually will get into some solutions for that. A password manager, whether you're using a password manager in just for yourself, for your personal things, it's a great piece of advice. We have one that we offer to our clients that we'll talk about in a little bit. That is an enterprise password management tool. There's also a number of password management tools that are available just for the individual use. One that I personally like is called RoboForm. Works really well. The password manager, what it's going to do is generate strong and unique passwords for you. It's essentially a database of passwords. You have a master password that you use to unlock it. That master password you don't share with anything else in the world. It's just a strong password that you use to unlock it. And once you unlock those passwords, say you're on a new website that wants you to create a logon, you can click a button called a generate button. It generates a completely random password for that site and fills it in on the page for you. And then when you hit submit, the password manager asks you if you want to save that username and password that you just created to your password manager. So it makes it really easy to create strong passwords. And then in that example, if you created a password on a site and that site gets breached, they have a password that's really crazy and complicated, and you only are using it on one site, so it's not that big a deal. It's not like they have a password that works to log in as you on a number of different sites. So using a password manager and using unique, that really helps out with creating unique passwords. Multi-factor, MFA, implementation of multi-factor authentication is really important. It's maybe a little inconvenient, but it's incredibly powerful. And they say security is rarely convenient, convenience is rarely secure. This is one of those cases. So multi-factor authentication, what that is we have a lot of us, for most sites that we visit, for most things that we do, we have single factor authentication. That's our username and password, something we know. Multi-factor is a combination of things. It's something you know, something you have, or something you are. So multi-factor would be a combination of at least two of those things. So a lot of us may have these for connecting into different services where you have your username and your password, and then you enter in a token that's generated on your phone. That's a really popular way. Another one would be username and password and a fingerprint. So those are two different ways to do that. Implementing that strategically, I think, is a really important part of this. You don't need to throw it at everything, but maybe you do. You need to identify specifically those things that maybe you have listening from your internal network to the outside world. I would say that you pretty much always want to have some sort of multi-factor going on there. On the things like email, I think that's another really important one. That's relatively easy to set up, but an important thing to do. It really makes it much more difficult for these bad guys to get in. If they can't get in, even if they have the right password, they can't get in if they don't have that second piece. Cleaning up your old accounts. So if you have a server, if you have username and passwords on for old email accounts, maybe at Office 365, you have them on your server, deleting and disabling those is really important. That first example I gave of that first company that got hit with ransomware, in their case, they had they were using a the guy got in using their old IT provider's username and password, which I'm guessing was probably out on the dark web somewhere. So yeah, he logged in using that and initiated the attack. Reviewing the firewall settings again, these two, either one of these would have protected that first company. Their firewall settings it hadn't been reviewed, and what had happened was the old IT provider had opened up a port on the firewall that allowed them to come in to do work remotely, and that port was still open. No one at the business used it anymore. The only person who ever did was the IT provider, but they quit working with the IT provider. IT provider didn't shut down that port, and somebody got in. So review those firewall settings. Do we still need this rule, this old rule that we created a long time ago? Do we still need to have ports open to our email server? We're not hosting email anymore. Those types of things. Make sure that you're shutting that stuff down. And then I think one of the most important things, I can't overstate the importance of having good backups. Having offsite backups or air-gapped backups are going to go a really long way toward protecting you from any number of threats. In all of these cases, in both of these cases, you know, the first example I gave, we had a good backup of the server, but there was no backup of this of these photos, and maybe that should have been something that had been brought up. It's also important to understand your RTO and RPO, and this is part of your disaster recovery plan. RTO is recovery time objective, and RPO is recovery point objective. So how long can we afford to be down? How long is it going to take us to take our most recent backup and spin it up? That's recovery time objective. RPO is how far back, how much work can we lose? So should we have backups running hourly? Should we have them running daily? The cost of your backup changes based on this. So mitigation. So when we're looking at other ways to mitigate, one of the newer kids on the block is EDR. EDR is endpoint detection response. It's kind of a next-gen AV, although that's a bit of a misnomer. Antivirus typically analyzes signatures. Well, that's traditionally what it did. EDR analyzes application behavior, and it prohibits specific kinds of application behavior. It's a really cool kind of new thing that that is super effective against these types of threats. Another thing to look into doing is network segregation. You know, a lot of us have flat networks where, you know, if we have a network set up, you come in, you plug in a device and you're on the network, or you get on the wireless and you're on the network. With the number of threats that are coming in from outside devices, it's really worth looking at segregation. So you have a corporate network, you have a guest network, and you have a network for employees that bring their computers into the office that, you know, you don't know what they've done with them. You don't know what their antivirus level is. You're working with us to make sure that all of your systems in your office are fully patched, but who knows what your employees are doing with their stuff that they have at home. Review your cyber insurance policy. Like I said, I think it's a necessity. It's an inexpensive typically, but it's important to note that it's not on its own a strategy. There are some people who say, well, I'm fine. I don't need to really worry that much about the IT security piece of this. I don't need to invest in that because I've got cyber insurance. Well, you're going to be able to use cyber insurance probably one time, and then it's going to get to be pretty expensive. And it's also important to note that when you get cyber insurance, they're going to ask you a lot of questions about your network. You have to understand what you're answering when you do that, so that you can actually collect if something happens. Jordan actually brought something up about this to me the other day. You want to jump in on that? You were telling me about New Orleans.
Yeah. There was in December there was a ransomware attack in the city of New Orleans, and to date, their attack has cost them about $7 million in financial damage, and they're still recovering. They're still several months away from rebuilding. They submitted it to their cyber liability insurance claim, and it went through, but it covered about $3 million. So even when it works, you know, you still have there's a lot of impact that these ransomware attacks can do, and it's ongoing for months, like you said.
And I think you told me that they were then, the mayor announced that they were going to be bumping their insurance policy up to $10 million.
Yeah, they announced that.
So again, it's probably not, I personally don't think that was a really wise thing to do. It might make him feel good that they did that, but anybody else that's going to want to attack their network is going to know that there's $10 million available for them to potentially collect if they successfully get hit with one again. So I would not recommend that you announce that anywhere, that you have that. It's a good thing to have, but not a good thing to let everybody know that you got. Dark web monitoring is another piece that I think is important. I mentioned earlier that I get an alert every single time that one of my that a credential associated with one of my email accounts is pops up on the internet, or anything that pops up with topdogpc.com shows up. It's a nice thing to have. It lets you know when one of those is exposed on the dark web. On its own, again, it's not a silver bullet, but it's a really helpful thing to understand, especially thinking about not only your passwords but passwords of your staff, and maybe even past staff. A story I heard recently was that somebody got one of these dark web reports, and all of the passwords that were listed on there were for a office manager that no longer worked there. And so it was no big deal because this person hasn't been here for years. Well, they said, let's just take a look, because this person was our office manager and they ordered a lot of stuff for us from different places. And they went on and to staples.com, and sure enough, the username and password they had worked, and they had their ACH info attached to that login. So they're fortunate that they found that, but just because somebody no longer works there anymore, it doesn't mean that it's not a threat.
Joe, I'd also add that, like, sometimes they they might compromise an old employee's password, but even nowadays we still see employees or different accounts having the same password.
Yeah.
And so that's something to think about too, is that they have this password that they were able to compromise from an old account, but now they're going to try using it on every possible account scenario and see if they can get something.
That's a good point. Web filtering. So, a lot of partners that work with us, we've put in firewalls that are doing web filtering, which is great. It does help mitigate this threat. But what about your employees that are road warriors, or they're taking their computers home with them, or they aren't necessarily in the office, or they're using a hotspot? Endpoint web filtering is going to filter that traffic generated by your end users. It could potentially protect their systems if they maybe try to visit a nefarious website, or if their machine is like trying to do one of those phone home things like I just described with an email attachment attack. So it's just another layer of defense. So getting into, let's see here, yeah, there we go. So some of the things that we're putting together, just because these products that I discussed, or these solutions, we're starting to package them up as something that our partners can use. One of the things I think is important is to just be able to get like a basic lay of the land of what's going on your network. So this is just with this basic kind of plan. It would be a network assessment that's just going to give you a picture of the types of data that you have on your network, the types of devices that you have on your network, what you've got open inside and outside on your network. We're going to bundling in the dark web monitoring that we just mentioned. That security awareness training is really cool. It's a great platform where we can set it up to train your staff on new and emerging threats constantly. It's great because when we can set it up so that you get a new employee, they'll be required to go through that training, and they have to show that they completed it. And then after they finish all of that training, we're going to start testing them. So they're going to get emails from the system that look like they're coming from places that they aren't actually coming from, like Netflix and Amazon and UPS and saying, hey, you've got a package here. And if they click on those things, we can see the types of interaction that they're having with those emails. And we can place the users into certain groups. Maybe somebody needs a little bit more training if they're clicking on those. One thing that is interesting with that is we found that the people who click on these are the same people who click on everything. So it's good. It's a good thing to be able to train your staff. It's a really powerful thing because it's so challenging. You know, this landscape has changed so much since I started the company 15 years ago. Security has always been at the top of my mind, but I think it's only recently that it's become a top of mind of a lot of business owners.
Yeah, and the attacks are so sophisticated now too. It's just, you have to be on high alert to catch some of them.
Yeah, your antenna has to be up. We're also putting in that enterprise password manager. And then kind of the next level up, this is a little bit more of a per workstation thing. So that EDR, this next gen antivirus, the company we partnered with in Silo, their product is amazing. I haven't seen anything like it. Right now, they have a feather in their cap that no machine that has this software loaded has ever been hit with a ransomware infection. It does some really neat stuff. There's real people actually behind it monitoring the behavior of the systems that it's loaded on. It's a really cool solution. Software as a service backup, so actually backing up Office 365. A lot of us have Office 365. I brought that example up earlier where your inbox can get encrypted. It's also great for if you have an employee leave who this is a type of thing that I'm going to just blow away everything in my mailbox because I'm resigning tomorrow, and there's nothing they can do about it. Managed MFA, so managed multi-factor authentication. This is a third-party tool. It hooks into Office 365, it'll hook into your firewall, hook into your servers, hook into your workstation. You can add it a number of different places. Salesforce.com, there's so many places that this integrates into. It's a really nice one. It's easy to use. It works with whether you have a phone or not. It can call you. You can have a hardware token. The phone version, it just sends a little push to your phone that that's your two-factor. It can also generate key codes. And then the last piece of that is just an automated ongoing network security monitoring tool. And that's going to give us insight into what's going on in your network on a daily basis. Is there a new device on the network that's broadcasting wireless, broadcasting wireless to the outside world? Is there a firmware on one of your servers that suddenly needs to be patched? Is there a new device that we're not managing that showed up on your network that's vulnerable? It gives us additional insight that we don't currently have. And then just a couple of other things. So Jordan mentioned at the beginning of the call, HighTech Secured, company that he started and I'm involved in. Jordan is a CISSP, if you're not aware of that. He's a Certified Information Systems Security Professional. It's a really challenging certification to achieve, and you have to continue to prove that you have to continue to do ongoing education to maintain that title. He's spearheading this effort of doing ongoing security assessments. They're a little different than the service I mentioned on the previous page that is just like, scanning your network. This one is looking at your entire security framework from employees to IT to policies, and it's scoring that out essentially. You're getting a score for every single one of those components, and then you're building a plan to either bring your score higher or accept where you are, based on that. Those decisions are completely based upon the industry that you're in and the costs that are associated with it. But it's a really important document to have, especially if you're in one of those covered industries like healthcare or finance. Building, we have a number of clients that we're doing backups for. We've got our kind of general disaster recovery plan for those guys. If you want to have something a little bit more in depth, that's something that we can help with. If you're not doing offsite backup right now, if you've maybe identified an asset that's really important that you need to have an air-gapped or offsite backup for, that's something we can help you with. Managed firewall, we've got a lot of a lot of partners who we've put firewalls in, the FortiGate firewalls in, and we do take care of firmware updates and that type of thing. But there's actually a little bit, they're really powerful systems, and there's additional functionality that we can unlock to allow us to see additional changes that have been made, allow us to push out security fixes a little bit more easily, and review those things, review the logs from them that are occurring on a regular basis. And then last, I'll mention the SOC services. We partnered with a third-party security operations center. They provide some hardware that does live monitoring of your network. They're based in the U.S. Not all security operations centers are. Security operations centers are extremely expensive to staff, and this is they've put together a product that I think is affordable by small business standards, that that really gives you some peace of mind. This is butts in seats 24/7 monitoring what's going on inside your network. So that's the kind of the list of the things that we're trying to put together to help mitigate this threat, make it a little bit easier on our customers so we can make some of those decisions for you. We've got I'm going to open up the Q&A here, but I just wanted to mention that we are, like I said at the beginning, this is the first of, I think we're going to do at least 3 of these. This is the first of them. Our next one, we're going to be talking a little bit more specifically about email threats, and that's going to be in about a month here on the 20th.
Right on. And we do have a few questions here.
Okay.
And by all means, keep submitting questions if you guys have something on your mind. Let's start with this one. This one kind of goes back to when you were talking about what do you do next when you discover you have been infected with ransomware. And it says, prior to consulting your disaster recovery plan, assuming you have one, what should you do before that? Should you unplug the machine, unplug the network? Is there something you need to do as soon as you see that you've been attacked?
Yeah, this is a really challenging question to give you a one-size-fits-all answer on. In the first example I gave where they got hit with ransomware, we understood what was going on their network. So they called us, and it might be that the first step in your disaster recovery plan, assuming you have one, is to call your IT service provider. Well, they called us, and we already knew what their network looked like. We knew what their backup situation was, and so we could, with some confidence, tell them to maybe start unplugging servers or shut things down. And that's what we had them do. We said, just shut your stuff down. If somebody is in your network, they won't be able to be in your network anymore. It can be a little dangerous to shut systems down because some of these things actually will rewrite the bootloader, and you might never be able to reboot the computer again, which can make recovery a little bit more challenging. So yeah, I can't give you a one-size-fits-all answer on that, but maybe the first thing I would say is to contact your IT provider.
Sure. Okay, we have another one. It says, does TopDog provide support to help develop a disaster recovery plan, or is that something we have to develop internally?
Yeah, that's something that we've built for a number of clients. I don't know, Jordan, if it's something that you want to talk about a little bit more as a CISSP, but
yeah, I want to be involved in those. It is something that internally you have to take ownership of. I think that's one point that I would make for all of this, is that whether you have an outsourced IT department like us, this is your business and this is your network, and so you should be very involved in it. But definitely, I like being involved in those conversations, and we want to help. We have some, we put together disaster recovery plans already. We have some templates, but you want to make it your own. And so, yeah, we definitely want to be involved in that. We don't want you to go it alone. Another question here. Let's see. Well, you mentioned this one, Mike. You mentioned AirGapping. Maybe in layman's term, can you kind of go deep, kind of explain what exactly that means?
Yeah. So it's really the concept of when used with backups. You're saying that the place that your backups are being written to is not accessible from the rest of your network. And the most traditional method of an air gap is like maybe your backups are being written to, they're written to an external hard drive, and then that hard drive is stored on a shelf somewhere it's not plugged in. That's totally air gapped. Well, that's not super convenient or realistic from a daily backup perspective, and it's still, there is a little bit of a, there's a window there where you're plugging that thing in, right, to your server. So the way I look at it is, and this is the way that we set it up when we do like a backup disaster recovery piece of hardware. We'll set up that backup hardware so that it's initiating the backup. It's reaching out to the servers and workstations that it's backing up. The servers and the workstations can't get to it. It's got a completely different, maybe on a different subnet, it's on a different network that doesn't allow inbound access to it. And it has completely different authentication information on it. Maybe it's got multi-factor on it. We're making it so that if an intruder gets into your main network, they're not going to be able to see that BDR piece. They're not going to be able to see where your backups are. So air gapping that, having that separate. And then the second piece of that is pushing those off-site. So it's your belt and suspenders. You have a good local backup, but there's always a chance something can happen locally, right? You can always have theft, which is probably the bigger threat than flood or fire. But getting that off-site, somebody breaks into your network, chances of them getting to your offsite backup provider are very slim, unless they somehow have credentials for them as well. But that's two networks you need to infiltrate in order to be successful with a ransomware plan.
Great. Let's see. Here's one. I'm going to try to. Yeah, I think this is kind of going back to when you were talking about how a ransomware attack kind of starts, and you're talking about scanning for vulnerabilities and things. What are some of the more common ports that criminals scan for?
Oh yeah. Well, the one that we saw, the most popular one, I think, is probably going to be remote desktop. That's TCP port 3389, and any variant of that, right around that. We had a customer that we were working with that had that port open to. We had gotten them as a new customer. They had that port open to their terminal server. It might be okay to have that open if you're taking certain precautions, or you can really kind of limit what people are able to do. We installed an application that looked for bad logons to their machine, and we turned that on, and within 10 minutes it had blocked over 100 IP addresses from trying to log into their server. So that thing was just getting hammered with attempted logons. VPNs are also popular, emails popular, basically anything that has a username password prompt.
Yeah, I was also reading an article where they were interviewing a former ransomware, like Russian ransomware cell leader on this, and he said that his favorite ports to scan are 5900 and 5901, which are the VNC ports.
Oh yeah, yes, another remote.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, so there's lots of them,
Yeah, that'd be another one with a username password.
Yep.
Yeah, somebody who's opened up those two ports probably is not a super sophisticated. That's not something that you should ever really open up to the world at large. And so yeah, I could totally see that being a popular one.
Let's see. Looks like we could probably do another one here. I think we just have one left. So here's one just kind of talking about budget. It's a little long. Let me just see if I can get the gist of it. So it's a smaller company. They don't have a information security budget, which I think my first response would be, you should get one. But now is the time that you should start budgeting for this if you're not already. But he says, okay, so they don't have a budget yet. So when you don't have a whole lot of room in your budget, where would you suggest that they start with approaching information security program of sorts?
Well, I think again, there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to this for like the first like thing to attack specifically. You're going to have to, if you have zero budget, you're going to have to yourself identify some weaknesses that you have, self-identify weaknesses, right? And put your resources there. If I guess this isn't like the greatest answer in the world, but if I were to look at what I see in our customer base, I think one of the more valuable, most best bang for your buck things is going to be end user security training. Getting your staff trained up to recognize threats is really it's really helpful. It just is going to make them better across the board when they're using a computer and on a connected network. After that, on the higher end, that next gen antivirus I was talking about, that's a pretty cool tool. And then the next thing up from there, which unfortunately it costs a little bit of money, but probably should be the first step in any security journey, is getting a full assessment and really understanding where your weaknesses are. So that piece that Jordan at HighTech Secured does.
Yeah, I think I would my answer would be two things, and it would start with an information security assessment, because you're kind of asking if you had $1 to spend, what would you spend it on? And if you to answer that question, you need to know what your greatest risks actually are. You need to know what you have and where you're at to identify that. And the other thing I would say too is just doing basic things, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that we can put into place that cost some money, and we've done our best to make this as small business budget sensitive as possible. But if you're not doing the basic things right, like having complex passwords, and things like that, then some of all this technology can be circumvented from that. So I think really understanding, and that goes back to your security training too. So just making sure you're doing the basic things right, and that doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, and one thing I glossed over is, we have these couple packages. There's some partners that we're working with that have some of these components already, and that's why we didn't put a price on these. It's really going to be a little custom to your organization, but this Essentials one, obviously it's a less expensive thing. And if I had to answer, what's the bare minimum I should do? That stuff that's in Essentials is a really good start, I think, that is going to apply to just about any business. It might not be your greatest weakness, but it is a weakness that we've identified pretty much across our partner base, that there's a gap there, and having these tools, these solutions in place are going to get you a little ahead of the game from where you were before. One other thing I mentioned is just like beware of the silver bullet. As you can see, there's a lot of stuff that we're excuse me, including in these plans. There is no such thing as a silver bullet. As great as this EDR is, I've heard of applications like that before years ago, and somebody finds a way around them. We've seen it especially in very industry specific solutions. We've seen people selling like in the financial sector, saying, hey, you know what, if you want to be compliant, buy this product and you're going to be compliant. There isn't a product like that exists. There's a process that exists that makes you compliant, but there's not a product out there that exists that makes you compliant.
Great point. We're coming up to the end here, but there is one more question that just came in. See if you can answer it in 60 seconds. It says, in regards to the training modules provided by the Security Essentials, does that offer modules regarding how to create good passwords or explaining basic security terms like two-factor?
Yeah, that's a good question. To answer your question, yes, it does. It also has a ton of, so it has a ton of content. We can go nuts. There's hundreds and hundreds of videos. In addition to some of these things that I touched on today, there's some really great industry specific stuff. So if you're in an industry that has maybe some specific types of things that you have to deal with, whether there are some things that are not even like specifically information security, IT information security related, but maybe you just have some general HIPAA training that you need to give somebody if you're in a healthcare space, or if you're in the financial sector, whether it's like GLBA or something like that. Tons of training on there as well. So one great thing we really liked about this platform is that it covers everything that we really care about, but it also it can cover a lot of things that we as IT people might not be considering, but we know that our partners have to deal with too. So pretty cool product.
All right. Well, nice job. I think you nailed it. All right. So that wraps us up. Thank you for joining us, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Have a good rest of the day.